The bitter cold of the alien world gnawed at the edges of the human's resolve as he trudged through the snow, the wind cutting through his tattered coat. For days he had moved across the frozen tundra, hoping to find signs of life. His food rations had long since run out, and only the last remnants of water were left in his small supply flask. His fingers were numb from the cold, and his stomach growled relentlessly, a constant reminder of his diminishing strength. The vast, barren landscape stretched out before him, nothing but endless ice and the occasional jagged rock protruding from the ground like skeletal fingers. The sky above was a dull gray, thick clouds obscuring any hint of sunlight. It had been nearly a week since he'd left the shipwrecked craft, and there had been no sign of civilization. Just when he was beginning to lose hope, he spotted something in the distance, a dark silhouette against the white expanse. As he got closer, his heart lifted slightly. A small settlement, barely visible, appeared to be nestled against a ridge of mountains. It wasn't much, just a few crude buildings and tents, with a thin plume of smoke rising from one of the structures. But it was shelter, and it was life. He quickened his pace, his body urging him forward, driven by the promise of warmth and sustenance. He arrived at the settlement's edge, too exhausted to make a proper entrance. The camp's inhabitants, a mix of various alien species, eyed him warily. He was an outsider, a human, something that these people hadn't seen in years, if at all. But they were too tired and too desperate to turn him away. The alien woman who approached him first was tall and imposing, her pale blue skin reflecting the dim light like frost. She regarded him with cold eyes that seemed to pierce through his very soul. "You look like you've walked through the stars themselves," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "What do you want here?" The human staggered forward, his words barely escaping his dry lips. "Water. I have nothing left, please." The alien woman studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slightly, gesturing for him to follow. He was led into the heart of the settlement, where a small fire crackled in the center of a communal tent. The warmth was a welcome relief, though it was meager compared to what he had hoped for. Still, he collapsed onto the ground, grateful for the momentary respite. One of the alien women handed him a bowl of something warm. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't care. He drank it down quickly, feeling the warmth spread through his body, though it did little to ease the hunger gnawing at him. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He looked up at the alien woman who had brought him here. She was still standing, her hands clasped together in front of her, watching him with a distant gaze. "You're welcome," she said quietly, though her eyes remained hard. "You're lucky we're still here. Most of our people are scattered, lost in the storm." The human frowned, unsure of how to respond. He had seen the despair in their eyes, the way they carried the weight of their world on their shoulders. This wasn't a thriving community. It was a group of survivors, clinging to the last shred of hope. He could feel the fatigue dragging at him, the exhaustion catching up to him after days of walking without rest. But he couldn't sleep yet, not until he learned more about these people. He had to know how they had ended up in this wasteland, why they were here. The alien woman seemed to sense his curiosity. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You should rest," she said, her voice softer now, though still distant. "You're not the first to wander into this camp looking for something, but you might be the last."
He wanted to ask her what she meant, but the words caught in his throat. It was as if she had known his fate before he had even arrived.
The alien woman's gaze flickered to the edge of the camp, where the wind howled and the cold seemed to stretch on forever. Then, with a sigh, she looked back at him. "I'm not like the others here," she said, her voice low. "I was once part of something much bigger than this, but that was long ago." He didn't know what to say. Her words were cryptic, but he could sense the weight behind them, the sadness that seemed to hang over her like a cloud. She was hiding something painful. I don't understand, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes softened for a brief moment, as if she were about to speak, but then she turned away, her gaze fixed on the fire. I'll tell you later, she said, her tone colder again. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we will talk more. The human nodded, too tired to argue. He didn't know what kind of story this woman held, but he could feel that it was a tale of loss, of survival against impossible odds. It was the same story as his own. Everyone here had a past, a reason for being here, for clinging to life in this barren wasteland. He lay down in the corner of the tent, his body aching with fatigue. His eyes fluttered shut, the exhaustion pulling him into a deep, dreamless sleep. Hours passed, and when he awoke, the camp was eerily quiet. The fire had died down to embers, casting faint shadows across the walls of the tent. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and glanced around. There was no sign of the alien woman who had helped him earlier. He felt a strange emptiness in the air, as if something had shifted while he was unconscious. The flap of the tent opened, and the woman appeared, stepping inside. Her face was still serious, but there was a faint trace of something else in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. She moved with a quiet grace, her long limbs fluid as she crossed the space to where he sat.
You're awake, she said softly, her voice almost gentle. Good.
We need to talk. The human nodded, still not sure what to expect. He had no idea what kind of past this woman carried with her, but he knew that the answers she held could change everything for him. He had no choice but to listen. The alien woman hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. I'm going to tell you everything, she said, her voice steady. But you have to promise me one thing. You mustn't judge me for what I'm about to say. He nodded again, his curiosity piqued. He had already made up his mind that nothing about this place, or the people in it, could surprise him anymore. But as she began to speak, he realized how wrong he was. The fire crackled softly as the woman sat down across from him, her eyes still dark with the weight of something unspoken. She folded her legs beneath her and took a deep breath, her hands resting lightly on her knees. For a moment, she simply stared into the flickering flames, as if gathering the courage to speak. The human watched her in silence, unsure of what to say. He could sense the tension in the air, the invisible barrier that separated them. But whatever secrets she carried, he knew she was ready to share them now. I wasn't always like this, she began, her voice steady but laced with an undertone of something old, something painful. I was born on a planet called Korath. It was beautiful, green fields, shining cities, clear rivers. We were peaceful people, strong in our ways, living without fear. The human nodded slowly, trying to imagine what it must have been like. He had only known the cold, barren wastelands of this world. To hear her describe a world so different was like hearing a story from another life, from another universe. But the alien woman's expression hardened, and she looked away, her gaze shifting to the distant hills outside the camp. Everything changed, she continued, her tone colder now. The Empire came. They promised us protection, offered us the promise of peace. But what they really wanted was our planet. Our resources. Our people. She paused, as if the memory of that time still haunted her. They took it all. Our cities, our lands, our freedom. The human leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. You were part of their military? He asked quietly. She shook her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. No, I was just a scout, a child when they came. My family, my people. We tried to fight, but we were too small, too scattered. They overran us. The Empire destroyed everything, except for the few of us who managed to survive, who fled when the cities fell. The woman's eyes seemed to cloud over as she looked back at the fire, the heat from the flames doing nothing to warm the chill she carried inside her. She was lost in memories, her mind far away from the cold tent and the human sitting across from her. "I watched it all happen," she said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "The world I knew, it was destroyed in days." There were others who fought beside me. Some didn't make it. Others, I don't know. They were taken, captured by the Empire. But we had to run. There was no choice. We were scattered, lost, forced to live like animals, hiding from those who once called themselves our protectors. The human felt a pang of sympathy, though he tried not to let it show. He knew what it felt like to lose everything. His own world had been torn apart by forces beyond his control, leaving him stranded in a strange galaxy, far from home. But hearing her story, the pain in her voice, made him realize how much worse it could be. "So what happened after that?" he asked gently. "How did you end up here?" The woman looked at him, her gaze steady. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to continue. Then, with a resigned sigh, she spoke again. "We kept moving," she said quietly. "Fighting when we had to, running when we couldn't. Some of us found each other while others, well, they didn't. The galaxy is a big place, and it's easy to get lost in it, especially when there are enemies everywhere. Eventually, we ended up on this world, a forgotten place, a cold place, but it was safe, for a time." The human could see the sorrow in her eyes, the burden of the years she had spent fighting, surviving, and witnessing the destruction of everything she had ever known. "And the others?" he asked. "The ones you mentioned? Your family? Your people?" The woman's expression grew even harder, her lips tightening as she shook her head. "Gone, most of them. Some still roam the galaxy, but they're few and far between. We're all lost in our own ways, scattered to the corners of the universe. Some are out there, fighting still. Others have given up, resigned to their fate. And some," she hesitated, her voice breaking ever so slightly, "some never came back." The silence between them deepened, filled only by the occasional crackle of the fire. The human could feel the weight of her words, the sorrow that had followed her through every step of her journey. He wanted to offer something, comfort, hope. But he knew there were no easy answers. There was no way to undo the pain she carried. She looked at him then, as if just realizing he was there. Her eyes softened, but the walls around her heart remained firm. "I didn't want to be part of the war," she said softly, almost to herself. "I didn't ask for any of this. But when you lose everything, you learn to fight. You learn to survive. And sometimes you do things you never thought you could. You become someone you never wanted to be, a shadow of the person you once were." The human sat in silence, understanding more than he had ever wanted to. He had lived through his own kind of destruction, his own form of survival. And though their stories were different, there was a shared experience, a shared pain, that tied them together. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice gentle. He didn't know what else to say. The words felt so small compared to the enormity of what she had been through, but it was all he could offer. The woman shook her head, her expression softening for the first time. "Don't be. You didn't do this. You didn't bring the Empire down on my people. You're just trying to survive too." The human nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. He knew there was more to her story, more that she had yet to say, but he didn't push. He could sense that she was not yet ready to open up fully, not yet ready to reveal everything. He couldn't force her, no matter how much he wanted to understand. "What now?" he asked, his voice steady. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared into the fire for a long time, as if lost in thought. The human could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between the past she had lived and the uncertain future that lay ahead. "I don't know," she said at last, her voice quiet but firm. "But for now, we survive. That's all we can do." The night passed quietly. A soft crackling of the fire, the only sound breaking the stillness. The cold outside was relentless, but inside the tent, the warmth was a small comfort. The human lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the tent, his mind racing with thoughts of the woman's words. Her story haunted him, not just because of the suffering she had endured, but because he could see the weight of it in her eyes, the way she carried the past with her, as if it were a part of her very soul. He understood that burden all too well. It wasn't just the memories of his homeworld's destruction that lingered in his mind, but the feeling that he was walking through life with an unshakable shadow behind him, following him wherever he went. The woman's story, though, made his own seem small in comparison. She had lost everything, her people, her home, her future, and yet she still stood, still fought, still survived. He thought of the camp, the people she had taken him in with. They were all survivors just like her, clinging to whatever hope they had left. There was no real future here, not in this frozen wasteland. They had settled for survival, not living. But he knew, deep down, that they couldn't survive forever on the edge of the world. Sooner or later, the cold would claim them all. As dawn's first light began to filter through the thin fabric of the tent, the human finally drifted into a restless sleep. When he woke, the woman was already gone, and the camp was stirring with quiet activity. He could hear the sounds of voices outside, the hum of alien machinery, and the faint clinking of tools. The air felt different today. He couldn't explain it, but something had shifted. The weight of the previous night's conversation lingered in his mind, but now there was a sense of urgency in the air, as if the woman's story had ignited something deep inside him. He couldn't simply sit idly by while these people struggled to survive. He had to do something. He rose from the bedroll and stepped outside into the cold morning air. His breath came out in small puffs, disappearing into the frigid air. He looked around, watching as the alien inhabitants of the camp moved about their day, working together to maintain what little they had. Some were repairing damaged equipment, while others gathered firewood or tended to small plants that struggled to grow in the harsh environment. The woman he had spoken to last night was nowhere in sight. He searched the camp, but she was not in any of the usual places. Finally, he spotted her near the edge of the camp, standing alone, her back turned to him. She was looking out over the snowy horizon, her posture tense, her shoulders rigid. The human hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. But something told him that now was the time to speak. He took a deep breath and walked toward her, the crunch of his boots in the snow, the only sound between them. She didn't turn when he approached, but he could see that she was aware of his presence. Her shoulders stiffened for a moment before relaxing again. "You're up early," he said, trying to sound casual. She nodded without turning to face him. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice low. "Too much on my mind." The human stood beside her, unsure of what to say. He felt like an intruder in her thoughts, but the silence between them felt heavier now. It was as though something had changed overnight, and neither of them knew how to address it.
"I was thinking," he said slowly, "about what you said last night."
About your people, your home, and about this place. He gestured around him, his eyes scanning the camp. "We can't just keep surviving. We need a plan, a way to fight back, to build something again." She glanced at him then, her eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment, he thought she might dismiss him, tell him that survival was all they had left. But instead, she simply looked away, her gaze drifting back to the horizon.
"I know," she said softly, "but fighting back isn't as simple as you think."
The Empire is powerful. They have resources, technology, everything, and we have nothing. We're just a handful of survivors hiding in the cold. There's no place for us in the galaxy anymore. The human's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. He understood the despair in her words, the hopelessness that had taken root in her heart. But he wasn't ready to accept that. He couldn't, not after everything he had seen. "I don't care about the odds," he said firmly. "If there's a chance, no matter how small, we can rebuild. We have to take it." The woman turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time since their conversation began. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, doubt, perhaps, or fear. But also a trace of something else, something he couldn't quite identify. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "I've seen what happens when people like us fight back. We lose, we die. There's no glory in it, no victory, just pain." The human took a step closer to her, his voice softening. "I know what it's like to lose, to have everything taken away. But if we don't try, if we just give up and fade away, then what's the point? We're better than that." "You're better than that." She didn't respond right away, but he could see the conflict in her eyes. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crack, little by little. He could feel it in the air, the shift in the way she looked at him. "I can't do it alone," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't carry this anymore." The human reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone," he said. "We're all in this together. You don't have to carry it by yourself. We can fight. We can survive. And maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild." For the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Enough to give him hope.
"We can try," she said quietly, her voice tinged with something new, something like hope, something like a spark of the person she once was. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose.
The alien woman, though still guarded, had begun to let down some of her walls. The human could see the change in her, the small flickers of hope that lit up her eyes, even if she didn't fully believe in them yet. She had started to help him organize the camp, to take charge in ways she hadn't done before. It was as if his words, his belief that they could rebuild, had sparked something in her, a small flame she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The human spent his days helping with whatever he could. He worked alongside the survivors, fixing broken machinery, reinforcing the camp's defenses, and teaching them whatever skills he could offer. Every day they made small improvements. New shelters were erected, food rations were organized, and the few pieces of alien technology they had were put to use in ways they hadn't imagined before. But even with all the progress, the human knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. The Empire would eventually find them again. He had seen the signs. The distant patrols, the increase in the Empire's presence on the outer rim of the galaxy. It was only a matter of time before they came back to finish what they had started. Still, there was a determination in the woman's eyes now, a fire he hadn't seen before, and it spread to the others. The survivors, once resigned to their fate, now worked with a sense of urgency, of purpose. They weren't just scavenging anymore. They were building. They were planning. They were becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground, the woman approached the human as he stood at the edge of the camp, looking out into the distance. The air was cold, but not as harsh as it had been when he first arrived. The winds had died down a little, and for the first time he allowed himself to relax, just a little. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He turned to face her, his heart beating a little faster at the tone in her voice. She had been more open with him lately, but there was something different in her demeanor now. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice steady. "I've been thinking," she said, her eyes focused on the camp behind him, watching the others work. "About the future." About what comes next. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. We've built something here, but it's fragile. It's small. If the Empire comes again, I don't think we'll survive. The human nodded, understanding all too well. They had made progress, but they were still outnumbered, still outgunned. Their defenses were strong, but not strong enough to hold off a full assault. He had known it from the beginning, that they were running out of time. We can't stay hidden forever, he said quietly. But we can't just give up either. We have to fight. Even if it's just a small chance, we have to take it. She looked at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in days. You've been talking about rebuilding, about creating something bigger than this, but we need allies. We need support. We need to reach out to other survivors, to other planets. The human considered her words carefully. She was right. They couldn't do this alone. The Empire's reach was too vast, too powerful. They needed more than just hope. They needed an army. I know, he said, his voice filled with resolve. But where do we start?
We don't even know where the survivors are. The galaxy is huge.
There's no way to reach everyone. The woman's expression softened as she stepped closer to him. We don't need to reach everyone, she said quietly. We just need to find those who are still fighting, those who haven't given up yet. And we need to give them something to fight for, something worth believing in. Her words struck him like a hammer. It was simple, yet profound. They didn't need to save the entire galaxy. They just needed to find the people who still had the strength to fight, the ones who hadn't lost everything. I can do that, he said with determination. We can do that. We just need to start, one step at a time. The woman nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. It was a smile of agreement, of understanding, but also one of hope, a real, genuine hope. For the next few days, they set their plan into motion. The human used what little technology they had to send out encrypted messages, reaching out to nearby systems, to anyone who might still be willing to fight back. He knew it was a long shot, but it was all they had. The woman worked tirelessly, organizing the survivors, preparing them for what might come. She taught them how to use weapons, how to defend themselves, and how to work together as a unit. She led them with a quiet strength, a resolve that was contagious. As the days passed, the camp became more than just a place of survival. It became a place of hope, a place where people began to believe that they could make a difference, that they could stand up to the empire that had taken everything from them. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was a start, and that was enough. Then, one day, the human received a response. A message came through from a distant system, a small rebel group that had been fighting the Empire in secret for years. They had seen the human's message, and they were willing to help. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that they weren't alone. There were others out there, others who were still willing to fight. The message was simple. We are with you. The human felt a surge of emotion as he read the message. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. It was the spark that could ignite a fire, the first step in a long journey towards something bigger, something that could change the galaxy.
He looked up at the woman who had joined him to read the message.
She was watching him, her expression unreadable, but he could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. This is just the beginning, he said quietly, but it's a start. She nodded, her eyes never leaving the message on the screen. It's enough, she said softly. Together, they turned toward the camp, toward the survivors who had become their family. They had a long road ahead of them, and there would be many challenges. But for the first time in a long time, they had hope, real hope. The woman stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. Everyone, she called out. We've got work to do. We're not finished yet. We're not going down without a fight. And as the survivors gathered around her, ready to begin their fight against the Empire, the human stood beside her. Together, they were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. And they were ready to rebuild what had been lost.